since we were talking a little bit about bugs, I'm going to give you guys a challenge. At the break, go outside. You know how the walkway to the parking lot, right? And there is a bunch of rosemary planted along the edge there. Identify the bug.
Spittle bug.
Oh, there you go. Those things are just covered in spittle bugs. And I'm looking forward to this a little later. Thank you. All right. Today's presentation is on plant propagation, and I'm going to give you a little short slideshow on the whole process. Basically, today I'm going to key in on 5 basic ways of plant propagation, and we're going to cram a semester into an hour, so you're going to get the abridged version. Basically, it starts out with sexual propagation, and then we get into asexual propagation. So let me go ahead and kind of just do the intro. So plant propagation is the purposeful act of reproducing plants. You actually want to do it. The propagator, in which case you guys, is this person possesses some skill, some knowledge, and with the practice of your knowledge, the practice of the skill, it truly becomes an art form. One of the most wonderful things that I see is if I ever go into a greenhouse, or I've been in some cases gone to where they do grafting or many of these plants, but in quantity, you ought to just see these individuals who work. It's just marvelous to watch them work, and the success rate that you get with these individuals. Whereas when I try to do it, I plant 10 and 9 die, and context and so on, and they get such wonderful, wonderful results. So typically, this person has a love of plants, a heightened skill level that is more than an art form. The more experience he or she has, the better chances of success. The more experience, the more science becomes art, the more knowledge about plants. So in essence, the more you do it, and the more you practice, and you develop your technique, your success rate is going to increase, and you'll have better and better results. So why do we propagate? You don't have to be a gardener, a farmer, or a biologist to know how much or how all we rely on plants so much every day. I was reading a little thing on Facebook, I think yesterday, it just so happened to pop up. And it talked about that at some point in time in your life, you're going to need a doctor. Some of you might even need an attorney. Sometimes you might even contact or have a contact with a police officer. But you know what? 3 times a day, that farmer is in your face 3 times a day. You're dealing with a farmer 3 times a day, every single day of your life. Think about that and how important plants and plant propagation in agriculture is. So, why do we propagate? Well, before I get into my little slide here, primitive man moved and migrated where you could harvest food. Basically, primitive man is a hunter-gatherer, right? And so we would go around hunting and gathering and looking for food, foraging, sometimes traveling large distances in order to get that food. But man, having a brain, observed from Mother Nature. He learned and adapted. Soon he began to collect plants. He began to collect the seeds. And instead of having to go chase and go look for food, man began to cultivate. He began to start planting. And in this process of collecting plants and seeds, Lord and behold, the cultivation and propagation of plant material began. Okay? So as these human tribes abandoned their nomadic ways, the agricultural revolution began to take hold. And probably this occurred during the last ice age, sometimes referred to as the agricultural revolution or the Neolithic revolution. And that happened about 10,000 years ago, give or take. So It did happen long ago, but nevertheless, better for us. Now we got Bonds and Albertsons and so on. So again, agriculture is the deliberate cultivation of crops for use by man. So why do we propagate? Food is the most important. Okay. What we're going to do today is primarily for the purposes of enjoyment. Some of you enjoy gardening, okay? But these techniques probably began with food, okay? And so, as man, that's one of the most important things. Secondly is, of course, clothing. And as you can see in my slide, this gentleman's eating, and he has a nice shirt on. So, 2 reasons. The third one is timber. Let's make believe and imagine that that table's made out of wood, okay? We use it every day. We use wood is in our life all the time. And then lastly, pharmaceuticals. And I'm going to say that this glass of wine can sometimes be referred to as a pharmaceutical. Okay. So anyway, so next. As I said before, food is what drives pretty much propagation in general. At least it's done that in the past. So after we've met all these basic needs and so on, some people still argue, and they're rightly so, that the true value of plants lies in their uses, but not in their uses, I'm sorry, but their intrinsic value to life. How many of you just feel just great when you go into a garden or you visit somebody's garden? And it's just, it's just a wonderful feeling. And that is something that true gardeners could really relate to. But even the layperson will sometimes just say, I want to just go to the park and enjoy the surrounding. And it's just getting that back to nature, especially if you live in an urban area or you don't get out much. You live in or you work in an office. Getting out to nature is really a very important part of our lives, and it's a very valuable part of our life. So something to also take hold, that there is an intangible there that we benefit from as humans. So let's start out with sexual propagation. What is sexual propagation? Propagation by which means? Seed propagation. And this is the largest seed in the world, by the way. Okay. This is called a coca lemur. Okay. Some sort of a palm tree. But seeds are typically produced from sexual reproduction within species. Because genetic recombination has occurred, the plants grow from seeds may have different characteristics from their parents. In other words, just like us, we're the prodigy of a parent, hopefully a mom and a dad, and something happened, and Lord and behold, here we are. And so basically we get the traits of both parents, okay? And that's the way seeds do their thing. And one of the most beautiful things about it is the fact that with the usage of seed propagation, you get some wonderful mixtures of it. Things that you're not expecting. And it's a very positive thing in flowers, but it can also be very detrimental sometimes in agriculture. In the sense that in agriculture, sometimes they want a specific plant that has specific characteristics. Typically, many of our agricultural processes, soybean, corn, sometimes they want specific varieties, specific characteristics. So they basically do that through genetics. But nevertheless, I like the fact that when you plant different things, you don't know what you're going to get sometimes, and that's really fun. And it also, this is another little slide that I got that I thought I'd share with you. For a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like a pile of destruction. And in essence, that's what it is. But then out of that destruction, you get some wonderful things. Right? She's one of these gurus that makes you feel better. So sexual propagation. The seed is the embryonic plant enclosed in a protective outer covering called a testa. So if you've ever looked at seeds, and I'll pass my little beans around. You guys can take a look at them. Those were sprouted about 3 or 4 days ago. Just to give you an idea as to how that sprouting process occurs. Okay. Angiosperms produce flowers such as marigolds. Gymnosperms do not produce flowers of fruits such as pines. So in other words, there's 2 types of seed processes. There's more, but this is what we're keeping it very basic. So when we talk about explaining the terms, a gymnosperm is which seeds are enclosed within an ovary, are not enclosed within an ovary, whereas the angiosperms are. So a couple things you want to keep in mind when you're planting seeds, and this is essentially what I did in that particular case. You want to keep your seeds moist, okay? So once you decide to plant them, they have to be kept moist. Dry periods can basically kill it, especially in the juvenile stages. In addition, various plant seeds thrive at different maximum and minimum temperatures. One of the things that I always do with my students is take a look at, we give them various packages of seeds, and we're going to say we're going to plant these seeds in trays. And one of the things that you want to make sure you do is that do a little research on that particular seed. What are the best ways for it to germinate? Does it require chilling? Does it require you to scarify, meaning to break that outer coating? What does it require so that you get the best results? Does everybody kind of follow that? I get these, I'm a big Strelitzia reginae fanatic. Anybody know that plant? Bird of Paradise. But I like Mandela's Gold from South Africa. Ever see a yellow Strelitzia? Okay, very cool. So anyway, I bring in the seeds from Christian Bach Gardens in South Africa, and I try to germinate them in an effort to introduce them more into Southern California. We're so overrun with orange Strelitzia that I'm sick of them. I like the yellow color. So anyway, so I've been doing some experimenting over the last few years, and so we're bringing the seeds in. A lot of it requires scarifying the seed, doing some various soaks, chemical soaks, in order to get it to germinate a little better. So those, some of the things you have to do is just study a little bit about that particular seed that you're trying to germinate before you do it. Because it might require, some of them require smoke. Some of the pine trees require fire. So it's very important that you do your research. Before we get to the next step, let's talk about tools a little bit. There are many types of tools, and having the right tool is very, very important. I'm going to start up here real quickly, and I'll pass these around. Just don't cut yourself. As a propagator, one of the first things that you want to keep in mind if you want to have good success is hygiene, okay? Which means that we want to make sure that we're dealing with clean equipment, and that clean equipment can come in a couple forms. Number one, you can use a bleach solution. You can use 10% bleach, dip your tools, whatever you're going to use, and that should kill any kind of disease on your blades. Alcohol would be another approach. In some of the greenhouses, they use Lysol. Never think about Lysol. You can use Lysol as a disinfectant. And then in some of the more sophisticated greenhouses, they'll actually use glass beads at a very high temperature. They dip the blades, and they basically burn off all unwanted little critters that way. Okay? So that's very important that as you're thinking about this, if you're a smoker, if you do cigarettes, your hands are full of tobacco residue. And the tobacco mosaic virus can be transmitted that way. So if you are a smoker, make sure that you wash your hands, that you either wear a glove so that you minimize the transmission of any of that potential problems. So those are the things you want to keep in mind, hygiene. Now let's look at our tools. A pair of pruners. You like my pruners? They're gold. Okay. Any pruners will do. Okay? However, if you're going to be doing this over an extended period of time, or you're serious about this end of the business, so to speak, buy yourself a good pair of pruners. And I mean something more than 10 bucks, okay? Anything that's $10 or less will last you about 3 weeks. And then you just throw it away. Okay? The blades won't last and so on. But a good pair of pruners, and I would say here in Southern California, probably the Corona brand has always been a good standard in the industry. And then there's another one that I'm passing around, is essentially this one that I have here, is the Felco pruner. And if you go to any nursery, and you'll see them sold, or somebody will be selling them, or somebody will be using them, quite frankly. But anything about the Felco pruner, and Corona's finally taken a lead on this also, is that if you look at I think there's one Felco going around the area here. Every single part on that pruner is replaceable. You can actually take that thing apart and order the blade, order the handle, and order the springs, whatever you want. You can actually order those and get them sent to you. Okay. Whereas the Coronas, as you get up into the 1-inch size, you can replace the blade, but everything else is forged steel. So consequently, once the blade goes, you basically got to toss the whole pruner. But keep in mind that a good pair of pruners is very important. So always consider that when you're doing this. In addition to that, I also passed around a little pair of little orange pruners that looks like it's got a needle nose on it. Does anybody have that? So this one. This is my favorite propagation pruner. This is actually called a grape pruner. It's used in the grape industry. Very cheap, 10 bucks. But for cuttings, for deadheading, anything real thin, you can't beat this guy. And it's very, very inexpensive. Okay. So something to keep in mind, this is something to add to your armor or your bag of shears. A lot of people just use scissors, which is fine. Okay. But this particular little pruner is excellent. So, it's China. It's, you know where I found this? Everybody's got their high-end. I always preach the high-end stuff, but when you find value, you got to have it. Okay. I buy these in quantities from a farm supply house, but they supply all the various orchards and stuff in the San Joaquin Valley, and this is what they issue to the employees when they're doing cutting. So anyway, if you it's called a grape shear anyway. So think about that. Very inexpensive, yet very, very effective, especially when you're dealing with cuttings. Then you get into the knives. And I saw some fancy knives. There again, it's what you prefer. This is what we issue the students at school. When we talk about pruning, we got two little pruning shears. Watch it, they're sharp, so be careful, okay? However, a lot of things will work. I got these at a box store the other day to do grafts, and it's just a blade. So I would recommend you get one that folds so you don't end up poking yourself. But nevertheless, a good knife, if you're going to be doing budding or grafting, it's very important you get something. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. It's important you get something that's very sharp. Okay. Did anybody bring any Band-Aids today? Oh, we have a nurse. Fantastic. Because we will be having a few injuries a little later. Okay. Yeah, it's one of the first things I do when I start that grafting class is we have a big box of Band-Aids. I usually have them put them on before they start. So anyway, so make sure your tools are very sharp. The maintenance of your tools is also very important. Okay. Have your tools sharpened before you start. You get much better results that way. Okay. Very good. So that's a little bit about the tools. And again, you can get real fancy ones. You can a good quality tool, for example, a good pruning shear, somewhere between 25, say 30 bucks is a good starting shear. Some of those Falcos will sell for between 50 to say 80, 90 bucks depending on what you buy. And then if you like the fancy stuff, you can pay 350 bucks. Okay. But look how good it looks. You look good out there in the nursery. Okay? So very important. So now let's talk about our first aspect of asexual propagation. And basically we get into the whole process. When we talk about asexual propagation, what are we doing? We're cloning. We're making copies. Okay? And the first aspect of asexual propagation that we'll discuss today is cuttings. Okay? So propagation using material from a single parent, and as such there is no exchange of genetic material. Therefore, vegetative propagation methods almost always produce parents or plants that are identical to the parent. Vegetative reproduction uses plant parts such as roots, stems, leaves, and in some plants seeds can be produced without fertilization. And the seeds contain only the genetic material of the parent plant. Therefore, propagation via asexual seeds or apple mixes is asexual, reproduction, but not vegetative. So that's kind of a definition. But what we're going to talk about is cuttings. Okay? And I brought an example. Succulents are probably the easiest things to propagate through cuttings. Okay? I always do these because it's simple for me, and when I have success, everybody says, "Oh, look at this guy's good." It's the plant, not me. But the neat thing about this succulents as a whole is that almost all parts can be propagated asexually. You can take a leaf. I could take this leaf here and put it in a mix, and I can grow roots from it. Okay. I can take a tip cutting and plant it in a soil mix, and I can have success and grow roots with it. So it's a very interesting way of propagation. I would say that going back to seeds are the most cheapest way to propagate, but also from a cost-effective standpoint and reproducing plants that are going to be identical to the parent, cuttings are probably your next best approach. Easy and very quick. We have entire industries now growing here in Southern California that do nothing but vegetative cuttings and are very successful. If you go right up the the 15 here up to Bonzo. Has anybody ever heard of Euro-American propagators? Okay. Euro-American propagators does, I don't know, something like 40 million cuttings a year. That's all they do. It's nothing but cuttings. Okay. And they have revolutionized the whole process to the point where they take genetically very clean material, basically chop it up, create cuttings, and plant them. And they're developing, or they've had a very good, thriving business that has taken the usage of some of these perennials and some of these annuals to another level in the eyes of the consumer. So the process of cuttings is becoming more and more desired out there. And again, it's because you get that copy, that cloning effect that's very, very identical to the parent. So cuttings is very important. So what does it do? Well, it fixes superior genotypes. In other words, that whole aspect of the plant, you're going to get that from it. Uniformity. One of the things that many of the growers strive to do is to get plants to either bloom at a certain stage, to be the same height, to have the same proportion, to have the same physical look, especially in the whole greenhouse area. And so consequently, that uniformity when you do cuttings allows you to do that. The facilitating propagation, again, as I just showed you, very easy to do. Shortening of flower time. Why is that? Anybody have any clue? Kathy? Why does it shorten flower time?
Sell them, get it to market.
Because it's already in bloom and people will buy it.
No. Come on. Shortening time to flower, guys. You're taking cuttings from a mature plant. You're not taking cuttings or doing a seed. Remember, a seed, you got to go through the juvenile stage to the adult stage. When you're doing cuttings, you're taking a cut from an already mature plant. So what does that mean? It's already at a blooming stage. You as consumers request and require that your plants bloom as quickly as possible, right? We have a saying in the nursery, no bloom, no room. Okay? Very simple. Why? Because you as a consumer want things that are looking finished or looking good already. So the quicker we can get flowers, the quicker we can get that stage of the plant, okay, looking that way, the consumer will be attracted to it. Okay? So we can also control the development phase through cuttings. And quite frankly, when I say this list, quite frankly, it's all asexual propagation, not just cuttings. Okay? So I want to clarify that. Combine more than one genotype in a single plant, that's when we get into tissue. And then only means of propagation. Now, bananas is an example. Some of the orchid species are examples of plants that are very difficult to grow seed. So typically, divisions or tissue are the ways that many of these plants are propagated in mass and much more quickly. Okay. So you have to look also, and I always tie this in, is you have to look at the cost effectiveness of the way you propagate. As I said before, from an expense standpoint, if you can do it through seed, that's a wonderful way of doing it. If you can do it through cuttings, it's also relatively inexpensive. But when those methods don't work or take too long, then you got to refine it and get into things like grafting or tissue culture. Okay?